You're welcome back. And yesterday, news broke of alleged stealing of petrol at the Office of the Special Prosecutor by two members of staff there. Now, this is an interesting case. The two members of staff in question here are Peter Owusu-Efriye and Joseph Dasana. Peter Owusu-Efriye happens to be an accountant. He was seconded to the office from the Controller and Accountant General's department. Mr. Joseph Dasana happens to be a retired chief director from one of the government institutions, who was then brought back on contract by Mr. Amidu to serve in the role of Secretary of the Office of Special Prosecutor. This is a role that is mandated in the Act that sets up the Office of Special Prosecutor. So it's a rather key and central, important role there. Now, the information that JoyNews gathered was that an investigation was done into the activities of these two when it comes to signing for fuel coupons, and it was found that they had overdrawn, first of all, taken fuel that they were not entitled to because they were both there on secondment, and so neither of them was entitled to fuel, the same as every other member of staff at the office so far. Nobody has been employed as a permanent employee, vetted and employed. So all of them are on secondment. None of them are entitled to fuel, but these two were, according to the documents we have found, drawing fuel in amounts that were very difficult to explain. Now, I'm going to very quickly walk you through these details here of exactly how the fuel was consumed by one of the two accused, Joseph Dasana, because his matter is slightly more complicated than the other one. Now, Mr. Dasana owns a Toyota Corolla, a 2018 model Toyota Corolla. It has a fuel tank capacity of about 13.2 gallons. Now, 13.2 gallons, to fill a fuel tank of that size, from most petrol stations in Ghana, you would spend between 250 and maybe 280 Ghana cedis, not more than that. We can have a look at how much it costs to fuel this vehicle right now. It's anything between 250 and 300 Ghana cedis to fill the tank of such a vehicle. But we know that Mr. Dasana spent more, well, actually drew about 700 Ghana cedis of fuel in one day to fill the tank of this vehicle. 700 Ghana cedis. Now, some might think, oh, maybe he took a long journey and had to top up. Well, when you put 200 Ghana cedis into a fuel tank of a Toyota Corolla 2018 model, it can take you very far. In fact, you would have to travel a minimum of 600 kilometers before you will need to top up. 600 kilometers. Let me show you exactly how far that journey would be. 600 kilometers. That is like traveling to Kumasi and back, and then traveling to Koforidua. Yeah, that's 600 kilometers. It's not the kind of trip you can make in a day and then come back to the office requiring more fuel, especially not when you have already collected a 400 Ghana cedi fuel coupon. You wouldn't need to come back for 300 Ghana cedis more. You could simply top up again from the 400 Ghana cedis that you took in the first place. Our checks show that the average Toyota Corolla owner spends about 800 Ghana cedis a month on fuel. But between September and October, Joseph Dasana spent 5,300 Ghana cedis on fuel for his Corolla. Well, at least he collected that much from the Office of the Special Prosecutor. 5,300 Ghana cedis for a vehicle that is not expected to use more than 800 Ghana cedis a month. We spoke to a lot of Corolla owners, one of them in particular who lives all the way out in Kaswa and works here in the center of Accra, not far from Circle, told us that it costs him 800 Ghana cedis a month on fuel. But Mr. Dasana spent 5,300 Ghana cedis on fueling his Corolla. So these are the general details of what happened in this matter. Now, why is this important? Why is this important? Well, because this is the Office of the Special Prosecutor. This is the office that is tasked with investigating and prosecuting corruption in Ghana. So you can see how it is a source of worry if the individuals who are being employed to do this are accused of such crimes, like stealing fuel. And so today we want to get an understanding of these implications. And by the way, these two individuals are still government employees. One of them was removed from the Office of the Special Prosecutor. Mr. Peter Usefrio was removed from the office, but he still remains an employee of government at the Controller and Accountant General's office. He's still paid with taxpayers' money. Mr. Joseph Dasana remains the secretary at the Office of the Special Prosecutor. He still is being paid his salary, also funded by the taxpayer. So we need to get some understanding of the implications here and whether there is a way forward of dealing with this so that the office remains and retains its integrity and remains effective. To help us get through this, Mrs. Teko Saba joins us this morning. She's the head of programs at Star Ghana Foundation, an organization that has done its fair share in funding and supporting anti-corruption activity here in Ghana. Mrs. Saba, it's very nice to see you. Thank you for making the time.
Thank you and good morning.
Right, so this is a story that broke yesterday. I wonder what your initial reactions are to it.
Well, it's a very unfortunate story to hear coming from the High Office of the Special Prosecutor. And it speaks a lot about, sometimes our expectations of some of these officers and what they should do. Of course, charity begins at home. So if there's an Office of the Special Prosecutor, everybody expects that the office itself will put its house in order. If you are living in a glass house, you definitely do not throw stones. And so it's quite unfortunate. However, we must ask the very difficult questions about how this came about and why this has come about. And understand that the Office of the Special Prosecutor itself, even though it's set up with very high expectations, it's not a silver bullet to solving all of Ghana's corruption issues. Now, we have to start from that body itself in terms of ensuring that the staff within the organization have the highest level of integrity to be able to push the agenda. Otherwise, nobody will take them seriously. One, we are happy that this has been, found out. But then there are parts of the story that we think can also be clarified a little bit. Because if this came out in as far back as last year, November, December, and nothing has been done about it, then we are asking, is it that something has been done?
The investigation was done in December. The actual taking of the fuel was September,
done
October.
Earlier. Yeah. So we are 5 months into the year, so we should hear something about it. We encourage the Special Prosecutor himself and other members of the civil service to take action as soon as possible to ensure that Ghanaians continue to have the trust for the integrity of the office itself to be able to do its prosecutions. Otherwise, the risk we will face is that nobody will take the office seriously anymore. We already know the circumstances within which the office was and some of the challenges it has had. First, the Special Prosecutor did not have an office. Civil society and the media fought for him to get an office. Then he did not have staff. Now we realize that people were seconded to him, and then he did not have a budget to undertake his activities. So all these things are impediments that civil society and the media are continuing to fight for the Special Prosecutor's office to be able to do its work. And then we hear of this news, But I think we also have to give an opportunity to the Special Prosecutor to make his case, for us to hear him, because these are his staff. His secretariat, the head of his secretariat and his account, these are very key members of his staff. What has he said about it? What has he done about it? Understanding that civil servants themselves have their own disciplinary processes. And as per the Constitution, you can't just sack a civil servant. There has to go through a process. Has that process started? Who is in charge of that process? Who is leading on the process? Why is the civil service silent about the story? All these are questions that we need to ask and get answers to be able to form a better picture of what we are hearing. Because as it is now, if you just read the story on the face of it, it's a very unfortunate story and does not help our anti-corruption drive.
Now, joining us on the phone is Daniel Batidam. Mr. Batidam is a former chairperson of the African Union Advisory Board on Corruption. He's a former advisor on governance and corruption during the tenure of former President John Dramani Mahama. He was based at the presidency back then. Mr. Batidam, good morning and thank you for your time with us.
Good morning, Kojo, and good morning to your guests and your viewers.
Indeed. Now, the first thing that crossed my mind when this story became apparent was that were the amounts involved. You know, 400 cedi voucher, 300 cedi voucher, total among the two of them over a period of September and October of less than 10,000 Ghana cedis. Is this a serious matter? You know, or based on the very small quantities here, should we really just, you know, be ignoring some of these occurrences?
Oh my, I mean, this is not a matter, in my view, for which we should even be talking about the amounts involved. The amounts involved are not important. It's the conduct. What is important is the conduct of officials who are supposed to belong to an anti-corruption institution and of whom we expect the highest levels of integrity, transparency, and accountability, and all the other things you can talk about. So I don't think you should go the direction of how much is involved at all. It is not important how much it is involved. The conduct of the officials or any official working in the Office of the Special Prosecutor and any other anti-corruption agency for that matter is one that must be above reproach. And I am afraid, thanks to your good work, that this is not good news from the Office of the Special Prosecutor, and it is more so at the time that Ghanaians are asking what is going on at the office. The special office that was set up to perform the magic that all the other anti-corruption agencies like SRAJ, ILUCO, and others have not been able to perform over the years. I mean, this is bad news at a bad time for the Office of the Special Prosecutor. And I think it raises a lot of questions. And for me, among them will be the issue of how people are recruited to that office. And of course, we are aware that already there have been issues about personnel and resource constraints and all that. But I think in all this discussion, we are talking about not just Mr. Amidu, but you know, the system and the institution. How is the institution being established? The Office of the Special Prosecutor, if it is established like any other office, we already have plenty of them, and we know that all these problems exist in all those other institutions. So was there the need to establish another office in the first place if we are just going to continue with business as usual? So I think this is a time, and I agree with your guest in the studios, that it is perhaps a time for a number of persons to speak, including perhaps the Special Prosecutor himself and the public service in general. But I think this is really bad news at a bad time.
You know, I want to expand on something important you said about the kind of people that are recruited into this office. You raise an important issue there because, well, these are all people on secondment from other state institutions. They are already part of the system that we are trying to fix. What does it say that the special prosecutor, in his bid to populate his office with people who will be different, has, well, unfortunately, apparently failed to find such people. What does that say? Where in Ghana can he look next for people who would, you know, have integrity and be able to do this job?
Well, he can look for me, but I'm not sure I want to come there. That's just on the lighter side. But on a more serious note, Kojo, for me, nothing is going to work. Nothing is going to work if we are going to populate the Office of Special Prosecutor with the same public servants or civil servants on secondment from the police service, from UOCO, or any other institution. In any case, what difference does it make to second people from institutions that we claim are not working for whatever reason to come and support somebody in an office that is supposed to be special? In fact, we need special people to work in the Office of the Special Prosecutor. We don't need ordinary people. In fact, I have been asking myself whether we are going to employ Ghanaians like you and I, born and bred here, or we are going to employ other people from a different planet. But there are many things that must go into the kind of persons that get into the Office of the Special Prosecutor, as it's a requirement for any other anti-corruption institution. Otherwise, this will be an exercise in futility. And we are already 1 year into this office. There is a lot of public resources being wasted and public time. The Special Prosecutor himself appears to be helpless. In fact, when the issues that are began to be raised in recent times came up, starting with your network and others, I took interest and tried to find out from the Special Prosecutor himself what may be going on. And at the risk of divulging information from private conversation, I think the Special Prosecutor is just helpless. He is sitting there waiting for certain things to happen. He is supposed to be relying on other offices, other officials, and indeed, he is depending on so many other things that one wonders what is going to be special about this office at the end of the day. So, Kojo, it is a good thing you guys are keeping this office on the banner, and I hope that sooner than later we will come to some firm decision and conclusion as to the continued existence of this office. In fact, for me, if you ask me personally, that we don't need this office. I said it from the beginning, and I say it today. I'm sad and sorry that I'm being proven right, but you know, you don't create special offices to fight corruption. You create special people and special attitudes and special culture and a special culture of work and a special code of conduct for people who are ready to get things happening in a better way than before.
Mr. Batidam, stay with us. There's so much more I want to talk with you about. But, you know, this point about bringing people from the existing system to try and do something special, you know, Mr. Batidam is hitting something interesting there. But there are some jobs or some roles that must be filled at the Office of Special Prosecutor where you can't really do it if you don't have experience, like investigation.
Yes.
You know, or even prosecution.
Yes.
So, honestly, I mean, does this make the whole exercise futile if we are forced to bring in people from the existing corrupt system to fight corruption?
So this is a chicken and egg situation, you know. What should you address first? And I think the first thing that we need to address is the culture within the public service. We have very good public service officers, and I've worked across the country with them. But you know that there's a code of conduct for public officers. And it started as just an administrative document and became a bill. And it's been in Parliament since the last Parliament. It hasn't been passed. So what holds a public officer to strict code of conduct, which includes things like conflict of interest? Why should we do this or not do this? And what are the sanctions for doing that? In our work, we find that there are 3 types of corruption. There's the grand corruption, the one that politics come in.
Yeah.
There's the petty corruption, which is what happens on the street. And then there's the quiet corruption. So there's corruption that happens because there's laxity in the system.
Right.
So this issue around the fuel is because, you know, there's a loophole that people have taken advantage of and seem to have taken advantage of for a long time. So what are the sanctions that stop public officials from doing some of these things that they see as normal? I think that's the most important thing. So the first thing is about the culture of the organization and what we can do to change it. The second one is about what we see as important to us as Ghanaians. And I recall that the National Identification Authority, the CEO came here and was talking to you, and he said that they had oriented their staff on the pledge and the national anthem so that they see their role as citizens of Ghana. For whoever staff comes into the Office of the Special Prosecutor's Office, I think they have to undergo an orientation. I have a different view about looking for special people because then we'll finally get angels to come and sit in that office. But I think Ghanaians have to model for ourselves the types of character that we want. And so we can get public servants who can come into that office and do the work and do it well.
But where are they? Where are these public servants?
It's just because of the culture of the place and the fact that there's laxity in the system. But
Right.
I do not believe that there are no Ghanaians or there are no public servants who can do this. As you are saying, there are 2 types of people in the Office of the Special Prosecutor. The technical people, the prosecutors, and then the admin staff. This actually is from the secretariat staff,
Yes, with the admin staff, yeah.
and not the prosecutorial staff themselves. And therefore, we still have confidence in the prosecutorial staff that they can do their work well.
Although we are told that
They do
there are
not have
no
any
prosecutorial staff yet.
Yes.
Yes, one lawyer currently working.
So we have confidence that people who become prosecutors in that office will have that sense of integrity. I mean, if you take other bodies, so EOCO, you look at SHRAJ, you look at the Attorney General's office, we have men and women of integrity who continue to do their work, in many instances going against what people take as normal, and they continue to do their work. So I do not think that we cannot get those same caliber of people to work in the Special Prosecutor's Office.
Right. Now, why do you think these 2 individuals who were investigated for this crime, why do you think there's been no action taken in spite of the fact that evidence of the crime was found by the investigator and passed on to Mr. Amidu in the memo?
Well, this is a question that's it's not fair to me.
Okay, let me ask it this way. Let me ask it this way. You probably can't tell us why nothing has happened. Yeah. But what does it mean, the fact that nothing has happened?
On the face of it, and coming from a citizen's perspective, you know, an ordinary citizen will question, why is it that after so many months, nothing has happened? But once again, we know that the processes within the civil service is lengthy and long. There could be that something has started that we are not aware of. So we have to give them that room. That is possible that something has said. So once again, let's open up an opportunity.
You mean it's possible that some sanction has been leveled against them for what's happened?
Or a disciplinary process might be in place. If you look at the Auditor General's reports and what happens for people who have allegedly, you know, misappropriated funds, it takes a while to get that process going.
Maybe I should share that our checks tell us that the processes that would have to be kicked in if a disciplinary action is being taken, none of those processes have been embarked on. That's what our checks told us.
Then that means that for us as civil society and for the media, this is where we come in as vigilant defenders of Ghana's integrity and the fight for corruption. And this is where our role comes in. So it's good that something like this has come out. We are still open to hearing from the special prosecutor himself and from the public servants and the civil servants who manage the work of the secretariat, to hear from them and see what they have to say. But as at now, and we urge them to actually come out and clear the air. Otherwise, it continues to create some sort of uncertainty in the minds of citizens around the work of the public service.
Mr. Batidam, you have had interactions, personal interactions with Mr. Amidu. I haven't had the pleasure of meeting him, so I'll bow to your superior judgment on this one. The fact that he has not made public, you know, these things that he discovered, and the fact that since the story broke, he hasn't made any statement. He still might, but he hasn't made any yet. And there are calls from organizations, and in fact people like Mrs. Saba here, for him to come and explain. But you know him. He has proved himself to be a man of process. And the law says he should update the public on some specific details of his work. This doesn't appear to fall under, you know, the requirement of that law. What would your advice be to him on how to handle this? Should he simply stay quiet and keep working? Or is this something that he ought to speak on?
Well, from my personal knowledge of Mr. Amidu, and I generally agree with him, I don't think that he's somebody who is going to be coming out to speak on any and every issue that comes up. And I think it is also important for an institution like that not to be going to the public I mean, like any other institution. They must follow what is laid down in the law for them to report to the public. And I don't know whether they have lived up to that yet. But let me say that from the information that has come out so far, I am not clear whether the sanctions or actions that have been taken have been uniform in terms of the two persons involved, because I hear that one has been sent back to where he came from, or if you like, been sacked from that office, and another still stays on. So this will raise for me an issue of why the differences in the kind of treatment given. But of course, we must also be mindful about the fact that being a lawyer, the special prosecutor would always like to go through due process. And we don't know what kind of due process that involves. Whatever it is, bottom line for me is that if there is any smell of corruption around the office of the special prosecutor, I think it must be dealt with as swiftly as possible. And so, even if, and you see, there is nothing wrong with always asking people to step aside whilst investigations go on, because you don't want to tarnish the image of the institution. So, for example, as we are discussing now, you know, whatever it is, it appears that there is some evidence of wrongdoing on the part of the two officials, and yet one of them is hanging around the office. I think that is quite problematic. And even if it is not for the special prosecutor himself to speak to it, I think, you know, the office should be concerned about the public perception and public anxiety, especially in the wake of the fact that Ghanaians are complaining that they are not seeing anything happening in the office as far as its key functions are concerned. And then all that they get to hear is about the office itself being implicated, so to speak, in acts of corruption. I think this doesn't help the office, and it is an issue that I would wish was rather dealt with swifter than the pace at which we are going. But let me make a quick comment on what your guest in the studio said about governance institutions. If you interacted with staff of those offices and asked who is an honest man or woman in this office, they will tell you, because there are such people. But you see, depending on the kind of system we use in recruiting people to these offices, we may end up not picking those special people that I think are needed in this special office. Because you cannot just continue with business as usual. You cannot be using the same methods and expect a different result. So if we are going to continue, if we are going to treat the Office of the Special Prosecutor as we have treated all the other anti-corruption agencies, then there was no need to establish it in the first place. We just needed to have been working on the existing institutions and trying to reform the persons there, or to do something about the institutions rather than establishing new ones. And that has been my argument from the beginning. There is a culture that needs to be dealt with, and it is not going to be dealt with by Mr. Martin Amidu or Daniel Bajidam or any other individual. It has to be dealt with from the point of view of a system, from the point of view of a culture, from a point of view of a society, and from the point of view that we have not been able to, tackle corruption from the manner in which it needs to be tackled holistically. And that is where I also keep on saying that we have missed an opportunity again by not continuing to implement the National Anti-Corruption Action Plan, the 10-year plan, which was developed and adopted unanimously by our parliament in July 2015. And it's a 10-year plan that was supposed to cut across political regimes. And so, for me, we should have been assessing the current government and its fight against corruption on the basis of how far they have gone in implementing the National Anti-Corruption Action Plan, not how far they have gone in getting the Office of Special Prosecutor to work.
What do you think, and in fact, we need a whole show to talk about NACAP and why it still has not been adopted. But let me ask you this. How widespread do you think this sort of thing is? You know, this sort of fuel bilking, situation where people either draw fuel when they shouldn't, as these two did, when they are not entitled to it, or overdraw, fuel. How widespread do you think this thing is in government? You've served at the presidency. How widespread do you think this is?
Very, 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 very widespread. Very, very widespread, and that is why I talk about the culture and the attitudinal aspect. You know what, Kojo? You know, when you try to do, the few people in the public and service who try to do the right thing, you know, they are odd members. The few people who try to do, they are odd members. These things are so right in the public service that, I mean, it is actually not supposed to be news. I think the only reason why we are discussing this is because it is happening in the Office of the Special Prosecutor.
Yeah.
And it is a serious matter that we can't even get things right in the seriousness of it emanates from the fact that even in the office that is supposed to be fighting corruption, that is supposed to be prosecuting corruption, people are brave enough to engage in acts of corruption. That tells you what might be happening in those offices that are not, whose core mandate is not anti-corruption. I mean, it just tells you that this is a very widespread thing. And I know, Kojo, I can tell you on authority that people think that those of us who have dedicated our life to fighting against corruption are jokers, that we are not going to get anywhere. But I'll be happy to die not getting anywhere because I tried to live an honest life, a life of integrity. Many Ghanaians go to churches on Sundays and go to mosques on Fridays, but they are the same people engaging in corruption. So we are not addressing the root causes of the problem. We are not addressing the root causes of the problem. But And that is why I insist that the National Anti-Corruption Action Plan was developed from a point of view of all the experiences we have had over the years, and we agree, all of us. There is nobody working in anti-corruption who was not part of the development of that plan. And we agree that there are 3 legs on which any approach to dealing with corruption in our country must stand. One is public education, the second is prevention, and the third is prosecution. Anyone who decides to choose just one of these legs and thinks he or she is going to fight corruption is just addressing a part of the problem. And given the cost of prosecution, I still think that putting in place preventive measures and engaging the public on creating greater awareness might be a better way to invest our resources than this attempt to establish an office to prosecute people. It is not about lack of expertise of the Attorney General's office to prosecute people. It is just that, you know, proving corruption is a very difficult thing.
Let me bring in Mrs. Saba on this. Should Mr. Amidu be taking responsibility for what has happened? I mean, he recruited these people. He chose them. If they are found to have, you know, been guilty of these very serious offenses, very poor conduct, should Mr. Amidu be, you know, taking responsibility for this and also be held responsible, if you will, for what has happened?
I think to answer that question, we have to go into how people are recruited into the public service, which Mr. Batidam spoke about. And the small that I know about it is that, you know, he might not have been the person to pinpoint them out, but just to say that we need people for these roles. The issue is that, you know, in setting up of the office, who is responsible for putting in place the structures and the systems and the policies that are required to ensure that the office is running smoothly? What are the policies around procurement? What are the policies around fuel? What are the policies around using a vehicle? And are these policies being implemented? So there's a limit to which he can take personal responsibility, but we also have to see within the setup of the Office of the Special Prosecutor and within the public service, what are the systems and structures? So it goes back again into the structures and the systems. I mean, yes, he might have had a role, and I do not know whether he pinpointed them and said, I want A and B specifically to come and work in my office. But because he's in charge of the place, you know, there would be, and he oversees them, there would be some sort of, you know, he might say something, but I do not think we should blame him directly for things that might have happened on his blind side.
There is an aspect of this that we haven't really highlighted, but it's important. It's not just that they took more fuel than they should have, but they shouldn't have been taking fuel anyway because they are on secondment. And this is something that our sources tell us Mr. Amidu made clear, so that there are other members of staff in that office who do not access fuel in any way, but these two did. You know, so there is that fundamental, you know, misconduct there before you then go into quantities and so forth. Is there, again, maybe some sort of tightening of loopholes that is required at the office to ensure that whoever, you know, comes in, now that they are going to be recruiting larger numbers, cannot replicate this sort of misconduct?
Most definitely. And as you are saying, that Mr. Amidu himself made it clear the boundaries of what they could and could not do, and then they deliberately went beyond those boundaries. So then it's more of an intention. They had an intention to mislead even their boss, and I think that is something that is criminal and should be taken seriously. Now, whoever comes into that office must know that that office is held in very high esteem, and therefore whatever you do would be looked over with a very fine-tooth comb. And so, well, maybe that also links up to Mr. Batidam's discussion about special people in quotation marks. But we need to have people there who should know that what they are doing will be in the glare of everybody else, and therefore they have to be careful. The tightening of the loopholes definitely have to happen. I am worried about the extent to which the special prosecutor might want to dabble in administrative affairs, which will take his attention off the most important fundamental things that have to happen. So we also have to balance that. This is important for him to do, but it's also important that we see that he's actually executing the mandate of the bill, of the law that he has been put there to do.
Right. I'm going to wrap up with you, Mr. Batidam, real quickly. I'm told we have just a minute to go. But I'm minded by the fact that the board has an important role to play when it comes to recruitment of certain key positions. And we've already highlighted the fact that there's a need for a stronger supervisory role to avoid some of these administrative things happening, so Mr. Amidu can focus on what he's doing. So certain senior managerial, if you will, positions would have to be filled pretty quickly. What role can the board play in ensuring that, like you said, special people are picked for these jobs?
Well, from where I sit, and if you look critically at the composition of the board, the board members are dominantly coming from a lot of public institutions, some of which also have one mandate or the other to fight corruption. And then, of course, the chair happens to be from civil society.
Yeah.
But you see, the appointing authority, again, the appointing authority for certain caliber of persons to the office is still the president, according to the Act. And that is problematic. We are going round in circles. Because, you see, the president is, if I'm not mistaken, and I listened to the recent appraisal by the civil society group, who were asking that the president should delegate that power of appointing certain staff to the special prosecutor himself. I think that is an important point to emphasize. Because even, look, those people who have been seconded to him, to Mr. Amidu at the moment, I'm not sure he had any say in their selection. So, in a way, there is something about what responsibility he can take. But you see, you asked a question about personal responsibility. I believe that anybody who finds himself in a position of trust in an institution such as the OSP must have some threshold and say, well, if things are not going to, if I don't get the basics to be able to do my work, I'm not going to stay in it.
All right.
And I know that I've had some reactions when I said, well, if the special prosecutor thinks that he is not being provided with what he needs to do his work, he should, perhaps advise himself. That is also personal responsibility. Otherwise, if you sit in there and tell people and continue telling people, well, this is where I find myself, I cannot do my work, then with all due respect, why are you there?
Indeed. Right. Well, Mr. Batidam, I can't thank you enough for your time with us this morning. We appreciate your insights very much. Mrs. Teko Saba, it's such a pleasure to have you on the show, and thank you so much for making the time to be with us. We appreciate it.